greetings, Lilian. It's lovely to have you visit here in the Castle of the Muses.
It's a delight to be here.
Hope you've enjoyed your stay.
I have.
So far.
It's glorious.
It's a wonderful spot, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the house is full of wonderful things to look at and read. It's
yeah,
great.
each room, as you know, is a different muse, and different kinds of things go on there, and different books. It's mostly a huge library, as you know.
Yes.
Here we're overlooking the loch, Loch Goyle, and as you know, there are submarines and so on that go up and down there, including Trident. So,
what a joy!
Yes. So I'm going to ask you a few questions if you don't mind. I'm very interested to have met you. You've obviously been some kind of a peace activist here in Scotland for many years.
Yes.
And a wisdom activist, I'd say. So I'd love to just hear a bit more about your background, how you got involved in peace activism, and the story of the whole. Well, the Scottish view that it's possible to have a non-nuclear path for Britain, you know, and obviously you've been involved with the peace movement in Scotland. So, and then maybe we can look at the spiritual dimension of all that. You know, is it possible for Scotland to have a spiritually protected land which nobody would want to attack? You know, those kind of paths of non-violence have interested me as an educator. I used to be the educational director of the Gandhi Foundation. So, but the structure behind, I suppose, what we're doing is this Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, which I've chaired 3 meetings, right? And I'm trying to get the kind of metaphysical button to turn off the metaphysical roots of that violence between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, and then it overspills into the mainland here, doesn't it? Yeah. It's now happening with Glasgow.
So I'm reminded when I was working in Clydebank Technical College, I was the drama teacher there, and I used to get what were known as the thin and thick platers who used to come for drama lessons, which was social studies really.
Right.
And at one point I asked them who's Catholic and who's Protestant.
Right.
And the class was split more or less into half.
Right.
And then I asked, so there were maybe 30 odd boys in the room. Young men between 17 and 22 or something like that.
Right.
And when I then asked the class to put their hands up if they believed in God, 2 of them put their hands up. So this notion that somehow whether to be a Catholic or a Protestant was related to whether or not you believed in God was alien to them.
So they're Catholic atheists and Protestant atheists.
Yes,
right?
they're actually
ironic,
but they worked out because we were questioning what we were looking at here, and they finally said, well, what we mean is we're not one of them. Right.
So the identity label is
it's a tribal thing about who you're not what you are. Yeah, which is
there's a stuckness in human psychology there.
Absolutely,
you can't move beyond that.
I mean, once they actually got it, they all laughed. They all went, we're a bit daft, aren't we?
Right. Well, maybe, hopefully, as a result of this interview, maybe the whole of Britain and Ireland can get it, because they can step out of that need to define themselves.
We can only pray that it be so.
Yeah. Well, you never know. I believe in it. You believe in miracles.
I do.
So this is the level we're working on here. Okay, so let me just start by asking you a question. Just tell me a bit about your background, where you were born, parents, that kind of thing.
I come from Stirling.
Right.
I was born in Airdrie Castle because just after the war it was still being used as a maternity hospital.
Right.
And my mother's from Callander and my father's from Poland because the Polish army were based in Scotland during the war, once Hitler had invaded Poland.
What was the father's surname?
Brzoska. So,
was he an officer in the army?
He was in... My understanding of it is that he was in the army, in an office in Invergordon, and was an administrative officer, as it were, once they were over here.
Right.
Prior to that, he had, as a young man, been drafted into the German army, and he had to escape from the German army to come here and join the Polish army. Gosh,
it was complicated in World War II, wasn't it? Yeah.
I believe he was a paratrooper.
Right.
But he never spoke about the war. After the war, my father it was that taught me about forgiveness and reconciliation by being someone who, I would say it was like living with the Buddha. Do you know, he was brought up as a Roman Catholic because he was Polish, and my mother was brought up as a Protestant in Callander.
Right.
But she converted when she married him.
Right.
She said she experienced something in the Catholic Church that she didn't experience at that time in the Presbyterian community that she belonged to. And she still continues to practice as a Catholic. My father's now passed over. But he, when I was maybe about 7, introduced me to a friend from the Camera Club, and his name was Argyll Bute, and he had been in the Luftwaffe during the war.
Wow.
And so my father's view was that there was no point in carrying bitterness around with you, it only twisted you. And that it was absolutely essential to practice forgiveness. My father wasn't just a verbal Christian. My father hardly spoke about what he believed, he just practiced it.
Right.
And he practiced being delightful to us, and singing and dancing and loving, and being someone who did not go on about the war, and who did not encourage us to hate Germans. You know, he said, "This is Carl, he's my friend."
Right.
So that was very early in my life. There was a sense of, you don't. So the peace movement actually comes from my relationship as a child, my relationship with Jesus, my relationship with what I was being taught, which was, love your neighbour, forgive your enemy.
Right.
And I don't understand when it's interpreted as anything else. I don't actually see how you can be a Christian and believe that it's okay to kill your enemy. I think it's insane. And I've thought that since I was very small.
So you went to school in Stirling?
I went to school in Stirling.
In a Catholic school?
In a Catholic school. And then as I grew up, I had fairly regular debates with the priests and the nuns about the things that I was disagreeing with them about. And about the things they were actually internally disagreeing with one another about, I discovered later.
Right.
Which was about whether or not it was all right to have a celibate priesthood, whether or not it was possible for women to become priests. All of that was something that concerned me. And I then went to college, I started teaching, and then I let go of that and went to drama school. And while I was at drama school, I started exploring what was really going on for a project. I started exploring what was going on ecologically, what was going on in lots of different zones. And I got somewhat concerned about the things that I was finding. And at that point, I would say I became more involved in the peace movement, as opposed to thinking it was all going to happen, because I thought it was self-evident that after the Second World War, with the situation that I had in my own family, that the whole country and everybody in the world understood going to war again was insanity.
Yeah.
And
so somehow the leaders would get rational international agreements based on the UN.
And so I believed in that at that point. I thought they all were sane.
Human progress, right. But then, so this was then, what, in the 70s or 80s that you started to realise that actually people had to be active to make leaders do peace stuff. Yeah.
And that partly was to do with also being in the vanguard of people saying, it says here in New Scientist that there's a hole in the ozone layer and we really need to stop using aerosols.
Right.
You know, like, it seemed to me it's a whole package. It's about, if the planet doesn't like it, then you don't do it. And
if the planet gives off warning signs that it's bad, we should listen to them.
Because if you don't, then you're actually killing yourself. You're killing the ecosystem.
Yes, it's very unintelligent. It's like self-harming. Some kids do self-abuse. They stick.
Now, it's my view that some people don't notice this because they've actually been quite harmed by their upbringing. Right? They've had battling parents. They go into fear quite early, and they don't have free
bullied at school, and so they shut down consciousness. They don't want to be aware of 360 degrees.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I mean, I only think that now, having done a lot of exploration to try and understand what I was meeting when I was meeting it as a teenager or as an adult, when I was meeting people who didn't seem to be able to think straight. You know, like 2 and 2 made 99.
Right. And so did you at some point see your ecological interest, your interest in Gaian consciousness, should we say? Did that fit in with your Christianity? Did you see Christianity as a green kind of... So Christ was a radical eco-activist before the word was invented.
Great guy.
Yeah. And he used a lot of nature imagery, didn't he? He's always talking about the fields and the flowers and the birds. You know, he was a green activist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was a green activist, and he was demonstrating what it is to be a loving man.
Right.
Now, for me, that wasn't a new concept, because I lived with a loving man,
Right.
and I called him Daddy.
Right. You were lucky.
Yeah, so yes, I was very fortunate, because I think a lot of people, when they look at what does God mean or what does Goddess mean, and they're told it's about loving,
Right.
they actually don't understand what on earth's
They
been
don't
said
have
to them,
experience, yeah.
because they don't have that concept. They've no experience of being loved.
Right. Right.
They may have, I understand from what I've looked at, that all children want to love,
Yeah.
and they love, therefore, the most horrific parents. Children are tremendously
They
unconditionally
get
loving.
trapped into abuse situations
Yes.
sometimes through that, which is
Very
tragic.
often, and it carries on into adulthood. So their expectation of what a loving relationship is that it's a manipulative
Yeah,
and damaging,
exploitative
relationship. I didn't have that.
No, well, you were very fortunate.
And it was wonderful to discover that I'm fortunate, but to get there, I actually had to go through wondering why on earth everybody was behaving so oddly. Yeah, because it's illogical.
Sure. Well, yeah. And when did your father die, in fact?
5 years ago.
Right. So, 2006. Yeah. I mean, I'm just interested here because
Maybe it was 2005.
one of my close friends that died, George Fursoff, some of whose ashes I have here in the Castle of the Muses, and I brought them out last night.
Yes.
And he said hello. His father was Polish, Victor Fursoff, and he was an astronomer. And he also was in Scotland in the Polish Free Army, or whatever they call themselves. I just wondered if wouldn't it be ironic if your father and his father, knew each other?
Yes, it
Did
would.
you ever meet someone called Victor Fursoff?
No, I didn't.
Around?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Because George was actually born in Scotland. His father was
My father actually didn't, until later in his life, he didn't spend a lot of time with the Polish community, because he wanted to learn how to speak English and how to fit in, actually.
Right. Okay.
And what he did was he naturalised, after I was baptised and had a birth certificate, he naturalised and became Al Kennedy. He took my mother's name.
Oh, okay.
And he was...
changed his name to Kennedy.
He did.
Right.
And...
It's a bit of a mouthful for you to go around with that surname.
Yeah.
What was it again?
Brzoska.
Okay. Ha! It's very nice. So what do you call yourself now then?
I call myself Lilian Brzoska.
You've gone back
But
to...
I was Lilian Kennedy for a long time. But when I started writing, and when the poetry and the songs started coming through, when I tried to write at the bottom of them who wrote them,
That's the name that came
Lilian Brzoska. And I discovered that it means silver birch.
Oh, right. Beautiful. In Polish.
Yeah.
Have you been to Poland?
Yes, I went the first time when I was 10.
Oh, right.
And that was an amazing experience, because I met my grandparents and my father's family, and he hadn't seen them since the war. So it was something like 23 years since he had seen his parents.
Gosh. And they were still alive?
Yes.
Your father's parents? Your grandparents?
My grandparents were in their 80s and 90s, and he had Uncle August was also in his 80s. 88 August was, with huge hands, a peasant farmer.
Right.
And I couldn't speak Polish and he couldn't speak English, but we got on great. You know,
Right.
he was just wonderful. And so at 10 years old, not only had I had the great fortune of having parents that loved one another and quite clearly loved me and my brothers and sisters, but I met people who loved me just because I was standing there.
Right, just ontological love.
Yes, so it was like unconditional Polish outpouring of European heart energy.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful.
And then I was taken to church in Poland at a time when the communist government were saying that it was not all right to practice being a Catholic, but they hadn't stopped people going to church.
Okay. Sort of very early solidarity time.
Yes,
Yeah.
so in the church, when they sang hymns, it was what I would call the freedom song that you heard.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't a kind of thin and almost non-existent hymn singing that I was used to hear, where almost always my voice was heard above the whole of the rest of the congregation.
Okay.
In Poland, in the
passionate.
church, it was like the whole riff was lifting.
Right.
And this was because in the church they could be Polish.
Right.
As opposed
So
to...
their identity was there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was a great love of their well-being that was encouraged in the church,
Yeah.
which wasn't about being a Christian. It was about being Polish. And
there's a
about
wonderful
being
tradition.
God's children.
Right, there's a wonderful tradition in Polish philosophy. I've been to Warsaw to meet philosophers and things, round about maybe a bit after that. And I was coordinating European Philosophers for Peace. And there's a whole thing called Polish Messianism, which is very romantic. The Poles are a romantic people.
Yeah.
And they wanted to save the world and they wanted to save Europe. And they've always been carved up by great powers like Russia, Germany, and so on, Austria. So that's fascinating. Have you been to Auschwitz on your journeys? No.
My mother and father went.
Right.
At the time,
it's a horrendous place.
I
do recommend you should go if you ever get a chance. Because I learned so much from going there about Poland.
Yes.
Because initially it was a place where the Nazis took Polish officers to kill them off, and they took all the Polish intelligentsia, the priests, the teachers, the doctors, the scientists, and it was a deliberate sort of mass killing of anyone that could think. They were taken to Auschwitz, and some of them were Jews, but they weren't all. They were mostly Poles, right? And it was a deliberate policy by the Germans, what they said, and there's a wonderful, tragic piece of paper in the Polish hut, because in Auschwitz they keep, like, it's a museum within museums. So there's a hut commemorating the Poles that died there. Then there's a whole area commemorating the Jews, and then a whole area about the Gypsies and so on.
Yeah.
And it says that, I think it was Himmler visited soon after the conquest, and he said, yes, we will educate these Poles, but only to a minimal standard. Only teach them a bit of basic reading skills, bit of maths, bit of writing, nothing too fancy, because otherwise we'll teach them how to think, and then they'll be dangerous to us. And this was their education policy.
It's similar to the education policy that seems to be practiced in Britain today.
Well, this is where I want to move on to, is the kind of dumbing down of people, and it seems to me that we're not going to get peace on this planet until people have the courage to stand up and be intelligent and wise, you know. So let's move on. Tell me a bit how you got involved with the kind of anti-nuclear movement in Scotland. Tell me a bit about the history of that.
Well, when I went to college, I went in Glasgow.
Right.
And Glasgow is 30 miles from here, yeah?
Right.
So I discovered that what I regard as potentially the biggest bomb in Europe is under the hills, 30 miles north of Glasgow. And that it's nuclear. Right. That they have
There's a
nuclear
storage facility
energy.
for nuclear bombs.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have nuclear submarines going in and out of Coulport, and that they belong to America. Trident.
Do they?
I'm told at the time.
The bombs belong to America.
Yes.
We kind of buy them off them.
Well,
But
they store them
British.
here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't know.
I
the
still
details.
don't really know what the truth is.
Right.
To whom does Trident belong? What I know is it doesn't belong to me. And it doesn't belong to anybody I know that's got any brains. And that concerns me.
Right.
Do you know, I think...
And who's got their finger on the trigger?
Yes.
And what would happen if there was a nuclear exchange?
And what we then
Is concerned
discovered when I was at drama school was that the Strathclyde police had done a recce on what they would do if one of the rods of nuclear stuff that goes through Glasgow across the Kingston Bridge, the spent fuel, and they discovered that the Strathclyde police couldn't possibly evacuate the city if there was an accident that was dangerous on the Kingston Bridge.
If one of those lorries tipped over and then there was a spillage, like just happened in Japan.
That's right.
They wouldn't be able to evacuate Glasgow sufficiently.
No.
Right.
I thought, this is not good news.
Right.
And at the same time, I thought, well, if these are moving up and down the Clyde, and at the same time I became aware in the Solway of there being a nuclear power station that was pumping nuclear waste. They say they don't, but it goes into the North Sea, and the fish were coming up with cancer. You know,
Really?
Between the Solway and Ireland, I was becoming more and more aware of the pollution. Right? What I was actually looking at.
Caused by the nuclear industry.
Yes,
Right.
caused by the nuclear industry and caused by CFCs and caused by fertilizers and caused by oil. You know, like it was all of it it's one to me. You know,
Right. You don't buy the argument. Some friends I know, and intelligent people who are Greens, if you want, who've worked out the sums and who think that the threat of global warming through carbon dioxide emissions is worse than the threat of nuclear emissions. So they've ended up advocating the nuclear industry to save the planet.
No, I don't.
You wouldn't agree with that?
No, and I think that if you were living in Japan today,
you probably wouldn't buy that.
No, I don't think so.
Sure. Yeah.
There is. It seems to me that if the risk of having an accident is such that it is unmeasurable what thyroid damage is done to your great-grandchildren by there being a nuclear accident in your town.
Right.
If you have no notion of how long the fallout will last, if it goes up in the air, that if you're going to create an ecological disaster, then it's just not sensible.
Not worth the risk.
No.
So it's what they call the precautionary principle, isn't it? That we have a duty in all those unknowns, therefore, to take the safe path.
Yes, especially if you live in Scotland and you say to yourself, what are the alternatives? And the alternatives are wind power, wave power, and hydroelectricity.
Sure.
And we've got more water pouring out of our mountains than we know what to do with.
Quite.
Why on earth would we need a nuclear industry? Because somebody's making a vast profit out of it. Is the only way that I can see that as making what they regard as financial sense. It doesn't make any financial sense to me.
Well, not if you factor in the cost of all the long-term.
No, absolutely not.
Issues.
And also there is a lot of research that I also discovered that had been done around the nuclear reactor in the north of England that is Sellafield.
Right, in Cumbria, yeah.
And it used to be called something else. They keep changing the name so that we'll try and pretend it's not there.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. Anyway, yeah.
And that the levels of leukemia in the children around there was far higher than other places. And of course it's got nothing to do with the nuclear industry. In the same way as the amount of mercury and lead poisoning in the children that lived around Spaghetti Junction's got nothing to do with what used to be lead in petrol. There was this constant argument that's made by people who have got vested interests in profit making that talk rubbish to me about what I don't know because I'm not scientific enough.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, going back to the kind of politics of knowledge thing, there's an interesting thing about the way science is misused in political arguments, because often you'll hear people saying, they'll dismiss someone like you as non-scientific because what do you know about X, Y, Z? And because you're doing joined-up thinking, scientists won't go because they're all trained as specialists in one particular field of knowledge. So you've just linked, lead in petrol with leukemia, with nuclear accidents. Now there'll be teams of scientific specialists in all those branches of knowledge who will be able to out-argue you.
Yes.
And that's kind of how they dominate the world. Silencing is another technique, which is why I'm trying to get the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, bubbling around the country and meet with people like you and hear your stories. Okay, let me just move on briefly because I want to get to the Irish thing. I mean, Ireland and Scotland go back a long way. The links.
I was at school. In the 60s, in the late 60s.
Right.
And I had a history teacher who said to me at that point, look out, he said, the English will be invading Ireland soon. Right. Because that's what they do every time they're not at war in Europe.
So there were no wars going on anywhere. The British Army was kind of lying in the barracks, nothing to do. He was implying that the British would be deliberately starting wars in Ireland.
Yes.
What was his particular agenda, this guy? Was he Irish or...?
No, he wasn't. He was actually
Scott.
Mr. Hanavy, Tam Hanavy. And he was actually probably one of the most erudite people I knew. He was a historian and he was also probably a Tory voter, so he and I had arguments with one another in the class and he loved it. He was one of the few teachers that I met that actually encouraged debate.
Right, well thank God there are still some, yeah.
And he
planted the seed of conspiracy theory.
He said, look through history and you will find that this is what happens. And I did look a bit, and I think it's not too far off the ballpark. And a couple of years later, the army was in Ireland.
Right.
Ostensibly invited in because
to solve the troubles.
Yeah. But the troubles that had broken out because the people in Londonderry wanted a vote. They wanted one man, one vote.
Right.
And at the time in the north of Ireland, you only had a vote if you were a householder. And a householder needed money to have a house.
Sure.
And the Catholic families, they tended to have more children, and they would have adult children living in the house. So you would have a mother and father, and unlike here, once the adult children reached 18, they had a vote. There they didn't. You didn't get a vote unless you had a house.
Right.
And if
Did you have to own it, or was renting it?
You could rent.
Yeah.
You didn't have to own it, but you had to have your own place to have a vote.
Right.
And if you had a smaller family, usually, because the Protestant families weren't known for having as many children as the Catholic families, then, and your children all got houses because you had more money.
Right.
And so there was this, and
so
still is,
a disproportionate
level of the,
to their numbers.
Yes, the different level of the financial support from the country was in their pockets, and they had a huge influence on the vote, which never changed. And the people were saying, we want one man, one vote.
So that was, that's regarded as a basic principle of democracy. You have one vote per adult.
And when
you're saying that in Northern Ireland that simply wasn't the case.
It wasn't the case.
So who got the vote? Was it the owner of the house? So the man of the house?
The man of the house.
So there'd be one vote per household, which the elder would cast. And so that was disenfranchising the wife and the children.
Absolutely. And it was different from
it's unbelievable.
Here. It was meant to be in Britain.
I don't think most British people know that.
I find that stunning. Yeah. And in Ireland, in Éire, it wasn't true at that point either.
It was one person, one vote. In Northern Ireland.
Only in Northern Ireland. And therefore I think if the British government had said, because it's a British province I'm told, if the British government had said, of course, we are now going to put the update that and never give anyone a franchise, there would have been no need to put the soldiers in.
Right, so the time of troubles and Derry and Bloody Sunday all burst up because of that, is what you're saying.
Yes.
That basic injustice.
Yes.
I mean, there is the phrase proportional representation. People want a more... That's what you're describing is what I call disproportional representation.
Yes, absolutely.
It's completely bonkers.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
And for me, even as a teenager, I could see that was incredible.
Yeah.
And
How did you find out about that? Was it talking to people from Ireland, or?
It was talking to people
teachers?
from Ireland and teachers in the school, because I was at a Catholic school.
So
and
they
therefore
were aware
there
of
were
that.
people who were there who still had family in Ireland, who had come across, because a Catholic school in Stirling was the secondary school was the school for the whole area, for the Roman Catholics in the area, because we were a minority.
Sure.
And so there were Italians, Poles, Irish, French, like whoever it was. It was a multicultural school then, and the discussions would happen in my household. They would happen in my friend Alice's household. So
they're politically aware.
Yes.
People.
And although I didn't have the same political views as anybody, everybody was entitled to give their views. We listened to one another.
Right. That's very exciting. Yeah. So look, now fast forward to the contemporary problems we've got. I mean, there was the Irish time of troubles you've described. Then we had the Good Friday Agreement and the settlement, so-called, and a kind of an uneasy peace. When I was in Belfast interviewing people, some were saying, yes, it's peaceful on the surface, but the tensions haven't gone away, the problems haven't gone away.
Well, I think that's real when you have families where the sons and daughters and fathers and mothers have all lost someone.
There's a lot of legacy of pain.
Yes, and unless the forgiveness zone's been engaged in, then it's an extremely difficult thing to deal with, disengaging the warfare that comes from being not them. The quality of peace and reconciliation that I believe has been used in many places in Northern Ireland, which has actually been with the women.
Right.
And with people using, in fact, power site tools like Michael Pogashnik going in and putting crystals and
working with energy
grids to try and deal with it all. Yeah. A lot there has been done.
Has he been
really
into
healthy.
Ireland to do that work, do you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I also know that when you've got a long history of disenfranchisement and a long history of opposition to do with the politics of religion as opposed to the engagement with the heart of peaceful, loving Christianity,
right,
then it can be very difficult to stop the men once they've had a couple of drinks going into the stuff that was there when they were children and
the
they were
oppositional
listening.
stuff. Yeah, hard to grow out of that.
Yes, and for some of the women it's also hard as well, but it seems to me that the women in Ireland were learning from the truth and reconciliation process that happened in South Africa as well. Because people who've lived through this, and I've listened to people talking whose sons or whose brothers or husbands were killed, saying the only person that gets really distressed by holding on to the resentment and holding on to the vengeance notion, that it's yourself that gets destroyed by it.
Sure.
And that it's only by working with, learning how to forgive, that you can actually do something about it and move on. And I've actually seen people talking directly to the IRA or the UDA person that's killed their family member.
Right.
And it working, where the one apologises, the other...
Yeah. That's the kind of model I would like to get on the agenda.
And when that's working, it's not in the interests of those who wish to keep war going. Now, it's my view that we live in a country where there is a vested interest in keeping war going because we are armaments manufacturers. And we're also...
There's a vested interest in certain circles, certain interests, the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower talked about.
However, it's not in the best interests of my people. It's not in the best interests of the people of the world. Yeah,
nor my people, I would say,
Absolutely.
nor the British people in general. If
and
you looked at the numbers, it's a very small minority who...
Yes, and they seem to have, similar to what was going on in Northern Ireland, a huge amount of influence on what actually happens in government. These people that do not get voted in by me, you, or anybody else. I never voted to have Faslane down the loch from us.
Right.
Nobody asked the Scottish people if it was all right to put Coulport in place with nuclear submarines. Nobody asked me whether or not it was all right to send the army into Iraq, though millions of us were on the streets saying, do not do this. And don't try and tell me that if you're a Christian government, and Bush was claiming to be a Christian, that it was all right. Yes, they both were, that it's all right to take your armies in and batter blazes out of the people because some small group of crazy men have blown up your buildings. This is...
Well, I mean, even that wasn't logical because there was no connection between Iraq and 9/11. I mean, we know that. That was just a falsified...
So in that energy field, I noticed that 2 or 3 months ago, I thought, don't like the look of this, because I noticed there was trouble kind of flaring up in Ireland that was being reported on the television. Right? So trouble can flare up in the pubs.
2011, you're talking about just recently.
Yes. Trouble can flare up in the pubs anyway when you've got these
situations. But there's bombs going off again.
But there's bombs going off again, and
and there was a policeman killed and stuff like that.
And I think, because along with this, they're talking about taking the troops out of Iraq.
Right, well, they have taken, I think, most of them, and now they're talking about
and
out of
Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And I think, Tam Hanavy's words come back. Look out, they'll be going into Ireland again soon. Now, to do that, they have to create a reason. There's also some craziness going on with the Celtic manager, which is also dealing with Celtic and Rangers, which is this Catholic Protestant
Rangers,
battle
the Protestant team,
Glasgow.
Celtic, the Catholic.
Yes.
So has, I mean, just explain that to me and for listeners, because nail bombs and physical assaults have been done on the Celtic manager, the Catholic. Is he a Catholic chap? Is a man of interest?
I don't know.
Presumably. I mean, it's irrelevant, isn't it?
Yes, well, now you can't tell. Right? Back in the 50s, if you were with Celtic, you were Catholic.
Right, but now they've just got professionals in.
And if you were with Rangers, you were Protestant. Right. And the notion that somehow or other Rangers would employ a Catholic just didn't happen. No. But in recent years it has been happening. There's a lot of crossover.
Yeah, like more professional. I mean, a good Protestant manager would be probably better than the bad Catholic.
Yes, and so whatever this is that's going on, it makes no more sense to the people of Glasgow than it makes to me. And I did live in Glasgow for a long time.
Right.
And I'm not one of the people of Glasgow because I was born in Stirling and I live in Fife at the moment.
Right.
But my heart has always had a lot of love with Glasgow because I was a student there and because I have many friends who live there. And my daughter was born there.
Right.
So
it's
she's
a
a
magical
Glaswegian.
city.
Yes.
Yeah.
We call it God's own city.
I'm sure it is.
I'm sure
Along
many
with all the
places
others.
are.
Yeah. So what? Just explain. People are sending these letter bombs to the Catholic team of Celtic. Has any been sent to Rangers or the Protestants?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it's mainly just anti-Catholic
Yes.
stuff going on.
And that.
Why on earth would anyone? I mean, have they arrested anyone? Is there any cracking of this problem by the police?
It's my belief that they have someone that they suspect
Could
might
just
be
be a
doing it,
nutter.
but
Yeah.
I'm not up to date with it at the moment. Partly because I'm in your beautiful establishment at the top of the Gairloch, and
Sure,
you know, I've not been listening to the television, and I've not been paying any attention whatsoever to the madness that's out beyond here.
Let's just hope that the destabilisation of this kind of it's football team politics, isn't it, that was going on in Belfast and Derry.
But the thing is, when you get things that are intelligent, really working, moving towards peace, and you don't want that to happen, if you are yourself clever and you think, what can I do to noise somebody up here that could perhaps bounce over and make problems in Ireland, then you attack the Celtic team, because the Celtic team also have a lot of people who travel from Ireland for the games. So this is a subtle process which is concerning.
Sort of
it could
provocation type.
Yeah.
Well, let's
and it
hope
might not. It
and
might simply be somebody who's a bit destabilised himself.
Yeah, it could be just
because he lives in a world where more and more it would seem that violence is being given huge levels of credibility as the way forward.
Sadly, that I hope you're wrong, and I hope that's becoming aware that non-violence is the way forward.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm a sworn devotee of non-violence as a strategy, whatever your political differences with some.
What do we actually need to do to make sure that this area is not the focus for this horrendous, powerful war machine, where there's razor blades on the wires up around Coulport, where somehow or other, despite the fact that thousands, millions of people across the world went on the streets saying, please do not go to war about this, find another way through, that the people who were in the chairs of power saw fit to go to war in the Middle East again. And we're going, this is just nonsense, please stop it.
And it impacts on the lives of ordinary people in the Middle East, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
And on all sides, you know, when Saddam Hussein was firing the Scud missiles at Israel, you had mothers and children in the basements, you know, hiding away.
And I'm told that there's actually in Palestine and Israel and all of the places where there's sand on the desert floor, that uranium-coated shells have been used.
Yeah, that's absolutely diabolical, isn't it? I mean,
so there's depleted uranium all over the desert floor. Actually, one of the things that really concerns me is the lack of genuine awareness of the connectedness of all things that seems to exist in Western culture.
Right, that we're too split up and we divide and rule, as it were, intellectually.
Now, the last time I'm aware of that there was much more connection for the majority of people in this land, in Scotland, was when the Celtic Christian Church existed.
Okay. So going back to Columba and quite a long time ago.
Where people walked to the land and rode horses and boats and engaged with the Holy Spirit with a direct energy field of connectedness, which we lost. I think there was a process through which we lost the language for that. You know, that
the Gaelic is important for this.
The Gaelic, and also the green language, I suppose you would call it, where people who could sense and communicate with one another about what they were sensing from the land were actually killed. You know, like the witch trials and all of that that happened.
The Druids just hid, didn't they, in the mists?
Yes.
And survived somehow.
Yeah. And some of that's actually been passed on and rebirthing now, and it's been assisted by the Maoris and the South Americans and the Native Americans.
And the primal people coming back
by
to
all the native people
and
saying,
reactivating the pagan wisdom of this land.
Yes, please wake up, they've been saying. You know, like the mamas came out of the South American jungle to say,
the Kogi Indians.
yes, seriously, there is a problem in the waft and weft of the world. Can you deal with it, please? And those of us who have been dealing with it, because we really heard what they were saying, have had to do a lot of learning. Have had to go places and learn how to sit still and listen. Right,
because the land will teach you if you just have the capacity to listen to it.
And so this level of them not understanding the earth is with us who want peace.
Right.
The earth is with us. The insects are with us.
Sure, and the trees are. And, you know, that's why in Avatar the animals come to rally.
Yes,
That's
it's so wonderful. I just so much loved it. I thought, a brother made this movie.
Yeah. Well, actually,
amazing.
The daughter of a friend staying here at the Castle of the Muses, Arlene, her daughter was actually helping do the special effects on Avatar.
Wow!
So, you know, she's literally here with us. And I think that movie is a good metaphor for what you're talking about. The stupidity of the rape and pillage of the earth.
I mean, there was a point at which I was outside the gates of Faslane, which might have been the last time, because it becomes very tiring to keep engaging with
to be a right
the might that's there.
Yeah.
And also because they were using energetic weapons, which they don't tell you anything about, but you know when you've got them at you. Or friends' brains, you know, the people who were...
Yeah. Molesworth and all these bases and stuff.
It's
they
really,
talk
really
of this.
problematic.
Right.
And so sometimes it's all right to go, and other times it's not. But the last time I was there, I was very away. I was interviewed 2 or 3 times by people holding television cameras, and none of the interviews that they had with me went out
on television.
On television, so they've got them somewhere, but they're not put out on television. And the
often truth is not aired. It's angles are aired.
And part of what I was doing was tuning in with the River Clyde and singing. Because the Great Mother Bride says, no more. No. There will be no cooperation with the warmongering. Not from any of us, not ever again. Because they cannot convince me that there's any good reason for murdering other people's children.
Especially in like mass attacks, like weapons like Trident.
No.
We're talking about wiping out
entire
entire
cities. Ridiculous.
It seems immoral, just even intellectually, let alone from the heart.
Yes.
You know? So the river goddess of the Clyde, you think, is on the side of the peace?
Absolutely. And it's not just that she's the river goddess of the Clyde. The Great Mother Bride is the great goddess, is the Virgin Mother Crone of the Celts, who is without doubt real, in my view, as real as what people think of Buddha and Jesus. And you may think all of them don't exist, and I'm telling you, in my experience, all of them do exist, and I have checked. Because the mother energy field, although I met it at first as the Matka Boska Częstochowa in Poland, in the Christian church, the mother energy has been given a secondary role of some kind. It's been kept, but it wasn't all right to actually think that you could connect with her. In the way that you do if you're working with the Druid energy, with the native people's energy.
It's more upfront and direct there.
Yes.
Whereas if you're working in the churches, you have and you get messages from the Virgin Mary, you're checked out, aren't you?
Yes, you are. And you're probably sent to hospital.
Yeah, or if once you're dead, they might make you a saint.
Yes, but you're not allowed to imagine that you could possibly be hearing
the goddess
direct, or Jesus direct, or God direct. It's got to be mediated through someone, and if it's mediated through someone and you're not supposed to tell anyone. I remember at one point being asked, do you hear voices? And you think, holy God, do you not? If not, why not?
Right.
So, are you not listening?
Right.
The whole planet's communicating.
Right.
Every animal is communicating, every tree, every bird, every insect, every blade of grass is communicating, hoping like crazy that we're going to notice once again that they exist.
So the field of consciousness studies, which academics are interested in, You've been doing that for a long time. You would
Absolutely.
say that everything is conscious. Trees, grass.
Yes, oh yes.
And so on. There's
I
a
was really
consciousness
excited
field.
to discover Rupert Sheldrake's work, because I think he's
Right.
been trying to work with scientists and,
Yeah.
and get measurements on it.
Right.
So,
And telepathy and stuff.
Please,
Animals
please,
have telepathy.
save me from the measurements.
Right.
But I do understand that some people need
It's
them.
quite important to argue sometimes. What do you think of this European ruling on outlawing sort of native herbal medicine in Europe? Have you followed the politics?
I have, and I think
Because that's about measurement, isn't it? Unless you can prove it's good,
Yeah.
and it costs apparently £60,000 to get a license. So if your family have been using a particular herb, you know, and selling it to each other, you can't do that anymore without that 60
I think
grand.
it's disgraceful. My first thought here was a very, very powerful picture there of Prince Charles, and I'm thinking, what's he saying about this?
Mm.
Is he being as ignored on this as he's been ignored about many other things since he was quite a young person talking sense and being made fun of for talking to cabbages?
Well, I'm sure he's against it, and I'm sure he's doing what he can to fight it.
And I think
But he doesn't have that much
this
direct
must be
influence.
to do with, my thought is Monsanto. This must be to do with the
big pharmaceutical
big
industries.
pharmaceutical companies trying to make sure that none of us can do anything without their permission. They've actually invented plants that won't seed.
I know, that was Monsanto's idea, wasn't it?
And you think, holy godfathers, what is wrong with them?
That is such a diabolical concept, yeah.
Unbelievable. They're
Yeah.
going to sell these seeds, these plants that won't seed to the third world. So that the
Yeah.
third world has to be
keep buying
kept
them back, yeah.
in debt all the
Yeah.
time, trying to pay for plants.
Yeah.
And they're actually making it illegal to collect seeds as well.
I mean, it's completely bonkers. Just two things. I once had a map of as a peace researcher, I have a map of all the nuclear weapons research institutes in the USA back in the 60s, 70s. And there was a big research establishment run by Monsanto. Most people don't know Monsanto used to be involved in nuclear weapons research.
Right.
That's one of their corporate profiles. I don't know if they've shed that. Wouldn't be surprised. The other thing I want to say is...
I am become death. That's what I remember the man saying.
Oppenheimer, yeah. No, it's time for life to come back.
Yes,
isn't it?
please.
You know, the life force. Bridget's on the side of libido and not for
Absolutely.
you know.
And also Lou, the male version of
lives,
that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this level in this area where there was a Maori, a native of New Zealand, Maori, who came to visit Scotland a couple of years ago in this area, and he was just blown away by how alive it is.
It's just so vibrant, yeah.
And that delighted me, because I could see he could feel it, and we've been doing a lot of work
Yeah.
to make the relationship, those of us who have been walking a long time, making a new relationship with the land, the water, the beings that are cooperating with us, conjunct with us,
Right.
trying to establish a new relationship, because for a long time they had withdrawn because they weren't being spoken to. Actually, every
The
now and
energy
again,
beings, the
yes,
spiritual beings,
every now
yeah.
and again
Yeah.
I come across a tree that I have a word with, and it's like it used to be a kind of shock
Right.
response from some of them. Oh, you heard me, was their response, because I wouldn't just go and talk to any tree, you know.
Yeah, it was the
if
ones
it
that
spoke to
called,
me, then.
yeah.
And of course I am insane, entirely insane.
Well, some people would no doubt say that because you are aware, you're a powerful woman, a light worker and a peace worker, so you must be slightly crazy.
I do the best I can under my own circumstances.
Right.
I did spend
Do
some
you, what
time.
do you do? How do you channel this? Do you do art, poetry, dance, music?
Yes, I sing. Actually,
Right.
something that's really interesting is that the lyrics come through.
You channel the sounds and the songs.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I think that's... I'm never sure what terminology to use, but I'm willing to engage with that.
Have you recorded? Have you made a CD?
The recordings I'm doing at the moment with the YMCA in Kirkcaldy,
Okay.
but they're not the channeled stuff. That
Right.
happens sometimes when the whole band plays. It goes active and everybody loves that.
Right. So the muse grips you
yes.
sometimes.
And then sometimes what happens is that something sticks and it becomes a song.
Right.
So the ones that have become songs, rather than, we'd call them chanted prayers,
Okay.
have been recorded. I did at one point do a recording in the crypt at Rosslyn Chapel of the streaming, of the channeling streaming.
Right. I've not been down there.
But half the recording equipment shut itself down.
Oh, did it? So you didn't get much sound?
Well, actually what came through was really very interesting, and there was somebody who wanted to take it further, but there were lots of blockages on that going any further, so I don't really, I can't even find it.
What do you think the mystery of Rosslyn is? Because you're living in Rosslyn briefly, aren't you, visiting? What do you think that's a goddess site originally?
Yes.
Maybe it's esoteric
recently I spent some time there with someone from Russia who's checked out all the stone sites in Europe, it would seem.
Right.
Urana, her name is. And she was tuning in with it. And I've always thought actually the hill beside the chapel is more powerful than the chapel itself.
Right.
But I'm not saying the chapel isn't powerful. It has a lot of encoding in the stone. So if you're able to stand in it in the right place,
yeah, you can
then
read,
you can read it. And then what you see turns you. You know, it's like there are ways to read the chapel which are really interesting. There's a story all the way around it.
Right.
And what also you find in buildings that are built like that, if you can make sound in them, then the sound sets up a standing wave, and that changes your consciousness.
Have you sung inside the chapel there? Yeah.
Yes.
And does it do that?
Wonderful,
is it powerful?
yes.
Acoustic?
Very powerful.
Right.
And I was really interested in the work of David Elkington about sound and the different sacred chambers that he's done that in.
Right.
And he and Chloe Goodchild have worked together.
They made a film, didn't they? A documentary about that, I think.
I've not seen it, but I'd be really interested to do so. But I heard him speak at the Saunier Society, and I would have loved to have bought his book, because there's a lot of the research, the scientific research that he's done about sound and different places that he and his friend with the sand tray went, because when you know the vibration of the wave makes the difference.
Yeah, if sound is the you know the vibrational essence that is involved in creativity. All the sacred scriptures of mankind, the Bible, the Vedas, the Quran. I mean, God speaks the world into being, or sings, or chants it.
Yes, and it is incredibly powerful when you start to do that in these places.
Yeah.
Apparently, if you mic them up, it doesn't work.
Oh right, it's got to be like
If you find your own note, what you need is the note that makes your body reverberate at its most powerful.
Right.
And then the church or the cave or the place
then vibrates in resonance.
Well, and then something happens, and it's why people love singing hymns. I think a lot of the time.
Yeah,
it's because it actually
especially
shifts
in Poland.
Yeah. Well, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Can I ask you another thing slightly? Because we just had an election in Scotland, of which the Scottish National Party won resoundingly and rejected. And I've just been in Israel interviewing, among other people, for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. A judge called Judge Shlomo Soham, an extraordinary man, who worked as an ombudsman or a commissioner for the Israeli Parliament, under the title of the Commissioner for Responsibilities to Future Generations. Right? And Israel, I mean, although it has a bad press in some places, it's extremely far ahead, right, on some other things. And what they did is they created this post. This was a judge, not a politician. His duty was to vet every single bit of legislation that went through the Parliament and say, what would this impact be on 7 generations from now?
Oh, wonderful.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And he had the duty to write a critical comment on each bill. So if there was a bill, let's say, we'll build 10 new motorways, stick them over these sacred hills and stuff, he could write, this is a totally devastating and terrible idea because the future generations are going to curse you for this.
Yes.
They didn't have, the Parliament didn't have the duty to listen to him. They could override his comments, but they sure take notice and stood up. I'm just thinking that if you have contacts with the SNP, which I believe you do, maybe they could contact the judge, learn and put someone like that into the Scottish Parliament to then look at the legislation that's coming through there. And that would be a very interesting political move for Scotland, wouldn't it?
It would be.
Don't you think?
At the moment I'm living in Kirkcaldy,
right.
and Kirkcaldy did vote SNP. And
right.
I do know the person that got the job.
Right.
So it would certainly be worth talking about what's the best thing, because I'm looking at what's the best thing for me to go and say to him about who I would like to speak to and how we would like to engage, because there will be a great discussion now in Scotland
about the future policy of the country.
nobody actually really understands, I don't think, how much in flux this vote indicates Scotland is.
Right.
Because a great deal of the Labour vote, the traditional Labour vote, has just gone, no, we're not having any more of these nonsensical lies being told to us, and we
the
trust what
disenchantment
we're hearing.
is still there.
Major.
Yeah.
And there's not necessarily agreement about whether it's a left-wing or a right-wing government, but it's more likely to be left than right, in terms that the rest of the world would understand. But it's also more likely to be a listening to the community government, because it's utterly necessary, and Alex Salmond knows that.
Have you met Alex Salmond? Have you spoken to him?
I haven't spoken to him. I've been close enough, but haven't actually spoken to him.
He was very strong on peace, wasn't he, in the Iraq
Yes.
War? He was very sceptical of
some
that
people
invasion.
I don't think it's necessary for me to actually have a direct conversation with them for me to know what I've been watching and listening for a long time. You know, when Robin Cousins finally came on the ice and I knew he wasn't going to fall down when he was skating for gold. There's a similar thing about what's going on with Alex Salmond and the Scottish Nationalist Party. They've kind of stepped into themselves. And that's because they understand that those of us who have the ear of God, the will of Goddess, the power of love moving with us, we'll move with them, Janet, until they actually do something we don't like.
Sure, it's provisional support. Really.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that what we are saying is we do not want nuclear weapons in the Clyde. We do not
or anywhere
want
in Scotland,
nuclear
presumably.
Anywhere at all in Scotland.
Or in Britain. I mean,
we'd rather not have them anywhere.
Couldn't
in the
we
world,
have a
really.
nuclear-free Britain? I mean,
yes, please.
You know,
I think New Zealand got that right,
sure.
didn't they?
One of the things I'm trying to do here at the castle, because we are so close to the nuclear hub of Britain's military might, is get an intelligent and serious discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, you were telling me that, I think it was you, was telling me that Enoch Powell gave a public performance against nuclear weapons.
He did. It was Enoch Powell's television talk on the nuclear deterrent.
Back in the 60s? Or 70s?
Well, it was when Margaret Thatcher was in power.
Okay, so
and I was at Clydebank Technical College, so somewhere between 75 and 78.
Okay. And he was demolishing the intellectual arguments for
79.
nuclear deterrence, basically.
Yes, he was. He demolished it entirely.
Right. And there wasn't a transcript of that talk kept?
It wasn't even reported. You know how normally the stuff that Enoch said was emblazoned across all the newspapers.
Right,
because he was quite
enfant terrible.
Yes, and his attitude to immigration was one that was being deeply challenging to everybody that was working. At the time I was working in the Immigrant Reception and Language Teaching Centre. And, you know,
so he wasn't your favourite person?
He wasn't.
But on that point...
But I thought I have to listen to what he's saying because I have to deal with whatever it is that he's saying. Because what he was saying was being, all that time, being given a lot of publicity. However, what he said about the nuclear deterrent received no publicity at all. It was hushed up as fast as the Irish president, the lady who went to the UN from Ireland, I should know, Mary Robinson.
Okay, the Irish president.
I heard her speaking at something like 6 o'clock in the morning in, let's say it was somewhere around about the year 2000, saying that she had resigned from the UN, where she had been, as it were, the children's representative at the UN. And she had resigned because she had been told it would be better for her if she resigned, because better for her and her family, she said, if she resigned, because she had stood up in the UN and told the American representatives that she regarded their attitude to the world as damaging to the whole, to the children of all nations.
As children, she said that.
As children's representative.
And then she was kind of basically threatened to move on from her job.
Yes.
So she then became President of Ireland.
Well, it was after she was President of Ireland.
Oh,
she was President of Ireland before that. It was the job that she got after she was President
What's she
of
doing
Ireland.
now then? She's probably an academic.
I have to say I don't know.
I think she was an academic originally.
Yes,
she's
but
gone back.
I know that she withdrew. I mean, she was on the radio at 6 o'clock in the morning saying this. It was not reported any later. It was on the radio very early in the morning, and then it was never said again.
Just two final points, right? One is about, you've raised it, the power of the media. and that's a big problem. That's what things like Holistic Channel and the work that Nicola Haig's been doing for me is about getting the small media to spread the good news.
Yes.
It's never the big boys are going to spread the good news, is it? Because they've got vested interests in the arms trade and so on. So, you know, that's just sad, isn't it? But I wanted just to finish on a good news note, right? About the spiritual dimension of all this. I mean, we can talk about policy and politics, but if we're going to clean the planet of weapons, then we have to deconstruct the theological violence that's been done, you know, the Armageddon picture.
Yes.
And I've shared with you my Golden Gate project
it's
in
wonderful.
Jerusalem, and the idea of opening that gate, and the collective messiahship of mankind. You know, all men and all women can participate in building a world of peace. I mean, do you think, we talked about whether a celebration could be held in Edinburgh or Stirling, you know, cities could twin with Jerusalem at that moment, 2012, December the 21st. What do you think of that? Is that?
I think there's a lot of energy for that. I mean, I know people all over the country that would be happy to
join in.
To join
we can't
in.
all go to Jerusalem.
And even if we couldn't actually join in doing something physical,
the
we are with you in spirit will be there.
Right.
Because the reality is that miracles are needed to do what's required.
That's right.
I find the work of Emoto really interesting in Japan, where it talks about water and how it responds. And I've been working with the water energy for a while with that. And I'm also really interested in how that the fire of a really good idea that's come to its time is unstoppable, regardless of what the media think that they're doing. Because many of us have gone media independent. We don't read the newspapers, we don't pay any attention to what's going on the television other than to look at it and think, oh, that's the latest lie, and then move on to the channels through which we actually do communicate with one another. And there are millions and millions of people who'll be delighted, absolutely delighted in that idea. Yes.
Well, let's hope we can do it. And I think St Columba would be delighted
too.
too.
Absolutely. And I think in
do you know where he is these days?
Aye. Well, you can either be located on Iona if you really want to go and have a look.
Have you been to Iona many times?
Oh yes, it's wonderful. It is definitely a place where between the veils is thin.
Sure. I'm hoping to go on pilgrimage there in August. Maybe you can come and join us and
how wonderful.
Show us around the island.
Yes.
Hoping to take a group of people there.
It's totally glorious.
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been before, but I want to go back. So look, I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you
so
for the
much
opportunity
for sharing with us.